Okay, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Babergh District Council's Cabinet. And it does feel a bit strange to all be back here finally after 15 months, and although we're all in the same room, you do seem a lot further away than when you were on the screen in front of me. First, I want to welcome Councillor McCraw to Cabinet. Welcome, Alistair, to your first Cabinet meeting, and I hope you'll enjoy the afternoon. So, may I remind all of you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that you maintain social distancing from all other persons in the chamber and in the social areas. Please ensure that you wear a mask unless you are speaking or if you're unable to do so, and that you use the hand sanitizer and wipes provided. Please maintain social distancing at all times during the meeting and during any breaks. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers. If you're attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off. And additionally, we will be using e-voting as usual for this meeting on the modern.gov app. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. And I'd like to move to the agenda now, please. But first, agenda item 9, which is paper BCA 21.3, the Gateway to Homechoice Allocations Policy, Review and Amendments, is going to be moved up the agenda and it will now be presented before agenda item 8, which is the Court for Performance presentation. And also in your agenda pack, item 16 is listed as a confidential item. It is not a confidential item. We'll be addressing that at item 11. So those are two sequence changes to the order of proceedings. So firstly, item 1, apologies for absence.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. And moving on, item 2, to receive declarations or pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members. Are there any to declare, anyone? Nope. Thank you. Item 3, that's paper BCA 21.1, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the Babergh Cabinet held on the 11th of March. And you'll find those starting on page 9 of your agenda pack. So if I can move through those, page 9, if anyone has any comments or questions. Page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, page 15, page 16, page 17, page 18, page 19, page 20, and finally page 21. Okay, no questions, no comments. Okay, I'd like therefore to have a proposer, please, for those minutes.
Happy to propose, Chair.
Councillor Holt and Councillor Malvisi, second. Governance Officer, can we conduct the vote now, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members, if you could go to the plus sign in the top right-hand corner of your ModGov app and select voting. The vote for this item is now in progress. Thank you, Chair. That's 8 votes for. That's unanimous.
Okay, thank you. Moving on then, item 4, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 5, questions by councillors.
None received, Chair.
Item 6, matters referred by the Overview and Scrutiny or Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
There were none.
Thank you. Moving on then to item 7, the forthcoming decisions list, which you'll all have seen prior to the meeting. Does anyone have any comments on the forthcoming decisions list? No? Okay, thank you for that. So we'll move on to the next item, which is item 9 that has been moved up the agenda. That's paper BCA 21.3, Gateway to Homechoice, Allocations Policy Review and Comments. I'll now ask the Cabinet Member for Housing to introduce this report. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am delighted to present to you today paper MCA/21/3, Gateway to Homechoice, Allocations Policy Review and Amendments. The paper before you today sets out some proposed changes to the allocations policy, which is used to assess applications for social housing and allocate vacant homes. The changes are predominantly related to national legislative or policy changes. Therefore, to ensure compliance with our statutory framework, these changes are recommended. In December 2020, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government issued new code of guidance called Allocation of Accommodation Guidance for Local Authorities. This clarifies new eligibility criteria for European applicants following on from Brexit. This guidance has also been considered while developing and updating the allocations policy. The list of changes are set out in Appendix B, but they include disregarding local connection criteria for spouses and civil partners who are required to leave accommodation provided by the Ministry of Defence following a breakdown in their relationship with their service spouse or partner. Clarification on how properties in rural parts of the Gateway may be restricted so that only applicants with a specific type of local connection are eligible for allocation of these properties. Clarification that when completing financial assessments on households to ascertain whether they can meet their own housing need will now include all adult members of the household, not just the main applicant's income. The cost of the amendments to the IT system totals £4,500, which is split equally between the 7 local authority partners. Therefore, there will be a one-off revenue cost of £642.86 for each council in 21-22. If we fail to make the required legislative changes to the allocation policy, then we could be in breach of our statutory duties under Part 5 of the Housing Act 1996 as amended. Therefore, the changes proposed ensure we meet all relevant legislative and policy obligations. If the Council continues without the proposed policy amendments, it remains at risk of a challenge. These changes are essential now to ensure we comply with the legislative changes that have come into effect. The Gateway to Homechoice Project Board want to conduct a wider review of the allocation policy, but this is a significant piece of work and will involve consulting with applicants and members fully, which naturally will take time. If we fail to make the changes proposed today and wait for the wider review to be completed, we are at risk of legal challenge, as just stated. The wider review of the allocations policy is now commencing and will take place, including consultation, over the next 12 months. I'm pleased to say an equality impact assessment has been carefully considered and is attached in Appendix C to this report. I would like to propose the recommendations set out in 3.1 of the report as set out in Appendix A of this report. Myself and the Corporate Manager, Heather, are happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Malvisi. Okay, then, Cabinet members, does anyone have any questions at this stage before we move into debate? No? Okay. We have one other member of the Council present. Councillor McLaren, do you have any questions?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, if there are no questions, we'll move straight into debate then. Does anyone wish to open this with some comments about this paper? Councillor Holt.
Yeah, my question really is, in considering this review and what we've got in front of us, are you happy that this policy will now be fit for purpose in that local residents will possibly be higher up in the allocation process? Because a lot of complaints that I've come across since being a councillor is that people who live very local to housing, especially new housing, seem to be jumped by people from away out of the district and further afield. So, I mean, are the real issues being addressed in this review so that we can ensure that the people in our wards are actually getting the housing that they need?
Councillor Osborne, can you respond to that?
Thank you,
Because
Mr.
it is a concern, obviously, and I know you're aware of that, we want to make sure that as far as possible that local can mean local with some allocations.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, as I said in my introduction, it is only a review to ensure that we're compliant with the new legislative changes that have come into force. Again, as stated, there will be a more robust review later on in the year. I know that a lot of members have mentioned to me their concerns about the current allocations policy, and that's when all those concerns will be looked at within the wider review. And we're fortunate that we actually have our corporate manager actually is the chairman of the board of partners now for Gateway. So I'm confident that she will bring forward that review within the 12 to 18 months that we've specified in our introduction. But yeah, I can assure you those concerns will be looked at, Councillor Holt, within the wider review.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. And to be fair, there is an additional paragraph in there that does strengthen that local connection for certainly for rural housing. Are there any other questions? Oh, sorry, any other comments that people would? Councillor Busby.
Just to follow up on that, sorry, when was that? When are we going to get the information from the review? You said 12 months in your thing, but then you said later this year. Is there a 12-month review starting now, or are we part way through it, or?
Sorry, I should have turned off. No, it's commencing now. As I mentioned, the review is now underway.
It's going to be 12 months from now, so
Yeah. It would. I will say it would have happened sooner, but I mean, I'm not using it as an excuse. But with COVID, it was because of other priorities that took place, and rightly so. It took a little bit of a back seat, but it is now coming forward because I know its members have mentioned it for some years now that they want this review. So no, it is currently starting to take place.
Thank you. Councillor McCraw.
I just wondered in para 4, sorry, I'm going back to the original paper, there's a mention of specific examples where a local connection takes greater priority in rural locations, and I just wondered if there were some examples of those specific circumstances.
Thank you. So the clarification in the policy is just to make it clearer. We get a lot of queries around the local needs properties that are advertised, and it's not necessarily as clear as it could be in the policy at the moment, so it's about changing the wording. But the reality is the allocations policy can't determine which properties are designated for like a village connection. That's set through the planning system. So when a section 106 is agreed as part of planning permission, it's at that stage it's decided whether or not it will be a connection to a particular village and then cascading parishes, or whether it will be a district-wide connection. The allocations policy then just ensures that we comply with that section 106 agreement. But at the moment, it's not as clear in the policy as it could be. So that's why I want to make this initial change, just to make it a bit clearer, to hopefully reduce the number of queries we get.
Thank you, Heather.
Can I follow up on that, Chairman?
Yes, Councillor McCraw, yeah.
I'm presuming the review will be looking to establish even greater degrees of clarity in that area, because I think it is an area where there is a lack of clarity because the circumstances can vary so greatly between one planning permission and another, and of course existing housing. And people are never quite certain particularly also with housing associations and agreements that have been made with those. It is a very mixed up system in some ways, and we need to provide a better understanding for the people applying. I think they do find it confusing.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Councillor Davis and then Councillor Holt.
Yeah, thank you. If you wanted an example, in my ward, in Ganges ward, we were able to get together the housing team and the planning officers, and obviously we had a recognised local need, and so this was for our housing, and work is almost completed. It'll be completed in September, and certainly a small percentage of those are dedicated to those with very local needs, and then the rest cascade out dependent on their banding and everything. So, you know, I've got a lot of people literally knocking on my door saying when they're going to be finished, we want to move in. But it can work, but the system, I think, is appreciated, needs to be tightened so that we can have that greater control in those areas. But so far, working together with planning and the housing team, you know, has brought good results for us. That's it.
Yeah, I think Derek's sort of know what I was going to say really. I think it's the consultation with the planning team that needs to begin early on these projects, so that we can ensure that when it comes to planning, they have the appropriate conditions attached to allow that allocation process to really cut in and benefit the local people who really, we feel, as ward members, they deserve to have those properties made available to them. So thank you.
Yeah, I certainly think that would aid in clarification, so that people are fully aware of what property is available and who's allowed or at least eligible for those properties. I just want to pick up on one other thing, and I think it's going to be a question for you, Heather, and that's regarding the improving the access to social housing for victims of domestic abuse, which is good. That's been strengthened. But one thing that I think that we probably don't cater for that well is if somebody has to move out of district as a result of that, if they're housed in a refuge in a neighbouring district, or provided with some sort of a temporary or emergency accommodation in a neighbouring district, that person then becomes the responsibility of that district for further housing. Whereas there may well be specific family ties, children still in Babergh, and the individual might wish to return. How do we provide reassurance that return to Babergh is something that we'll be able to support with housing?
Thank you, Councillor Ward. In regards to domestic abuse, somebody can actually present to any local authority in the country, so they will make an informed decision about where they wish to move to. If somebody wants to remain living in the district, then we have to carry out a risk assessment to ascertain actually the risk posed to them and the risk of pursuit, and whether or not it is actually safe for them to remain, and if so, what safety measures can be put in place to prevent any harm coming to them. So we don't exclude anyone that's a victim of domestic abuse from remaining in the district, but we have to make sure it's safe and appropriate for them to do so before we do house them.
The issue if children still remain with either parents, grandparents, or somehow with another partner.
Yeah, so there is examples where there is domestic abuse, but there's also, but they still have shared arrangements in regards to children, and so often independent domestic violence advisors or social care will advise on the safe methods of how children can be handed over. It's often done through a third party, and so the perpetrator won't necessarily know where the person's moved to.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have any further comments to make about this? Councillor Arthey.
It's just a quick one for Heather, probably, and it's as a result of the talk about local connection. There's a difficult balance that you have to strike, isn't there, between the need, the requirement, and the connection. Because I don't know if I'm the only one, I'm sure I'm not. I get emails from people who've got a local connection but they haven't been allocated one of the houses because an assessment has to be made of what their accommodation requirement is, so we're not going to put a single person in a 3-bedder. And also, there's the balance that you have to have with regard to need. And we can learn something from that, because when we're providing these homes, we need to have a good assessment of what the local need is, what type of property. Otherwise, we could be building homes for local people, but there aren't actually the local people with that accommodation requirement.
Thank you, Councillor Arfi. Yes, so as part of the allocations policy, when, we, for example, a rural exception site where the criteria is that somebody's got to be allocated it who either lives in the village or normally is like then cascading parishes around there, and then thirdly will be like a district-wide connection. It's prioritised by the first being who's in the village and actually what band they're in. So those in highest need that live in the village will qualify first, and it will then cascade further down. So it will look at band A right through to band E, then it will look at who lives in a neighbouring parish, and then who has that district-wide connection. But, I mean, sometimes we do find that actually those that have the local connection are adequately housed. So actually when it is a rural exception site, often those housed in those properties will actually be adequately housed, for example, in private rental accommodation in the village at the moment. Whereas we've got a significant number of people on the housing register in a much higher need and a much higher band, but because they haven't got that local connection, they don't actually qualify for it.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any further comments they wish to make? It seems that these changes are, they've covered quite a number of areas which I think did need further clarification and strengthening. So as a review of the policy as it stands, I think what we've got here is very good, very useful, and so I think, no, Councillor Osborne, you're very happy with it, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely, and also look forward to the more wider review as well coming forward. So, but no, I'm more than happy with the changes that have been made to date.
Yeah, okay, and we'll all look forward to that wider review. So I think now we can move to the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the vote is now in progress on your ModGov app. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 8 votes for, that's unanimous.
Great, thank you very much. Right, we'll move back now to item 8 on the report, paper BCA 21-2, the Quarter 4 performance presentation. And I'll now ask the Cabinet Member for Customers, the new Cabinet Member for Customers, Digital Transformation and Improvement, to provide an introduction. Councillor McCraw, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Quarter 4 performances are before you in the format that we've been using in the course of the last year. I don't know that I can add a great deal to the information that's presented there. Obviously, there are going to be some particular points that can be picked out on, and I imagine that would come up in questioning. If there are any questions, Sarah Wilcock would be here to answer specific answers while I get to grips with this new portfolio. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so Sarah, ready for presenting?
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Ward and Councillor McGraw. So I'd like you to introduce our Quarter 4 performance presentation covering the period January through to the end of March 2021. You'll see that this presentation, as Councillor McGraw notes, follows our new style, which was introduced at the beginning of the financial year and is focused on our 6 key priorities from the corporate plan, as well as the overall health of the organisation. Taken in its entirety, the report seeks to provide that high-level assurance that the Council is delivering against the corporate plan, highlighting some key performance measures, progress against objectives, and a look forward to planned activity in the next quarter. I think it's important context just to recall that whilst we've been enjoying the benefits of the relaxation of certain COVID rules more recently, and we look forward with some optimism for further easing of restrictions, this presentation does cover an unprecedented period where we were in the throes of a third lockdown and where we had to undertake a re-evaluation of projects and priorities to ensure that as an organisation we could continue to meet challenges of the additional work and pressures as a result of COVID. As is customary, I don't intend to run through the entirety of both presentations, although I would like to just mention a couple of things. The first of which is our desire to ensure that we continue to improve the format of the presentation, making sure we include engaging content. And with this in mind, you'll see that the third page of the presentation provides an update on the fantastic news that we are one of the finalists for the IESE prestigious award for Council of the Year. We're also finalists in 2 other categories, including customer focus for the fantastic work undertaken by the planning enforcement team, and asset management and regeneration for the innovative virtual high street project. A short video is embedded with the presentation, which showcases some of the amazing work that has been undertaken across the council during this very challenging 14 months. We've also built in a couple of case studies that hopefully illustrate the successful outcomes and tangible positive differences we are making to residents in our districts through the work of Central Suffolk Lettings and through our housing assistance policy. Following feedback from Q3, we have also reduced the number of pages as well as reducing the amount of narrative to try and make the presentation more concise. And also taking account of feedback from last quarter, following today's presentation, we will circulate links to the presentation both in the Councillor Fortnightly email update as well as the parish newsletter update provided to all councillors and Working Together for all staff and councillors. I am particularly conscious that we've now seen a whole yearly cycle of this particular format for the quarterly presentations, but recognise there is still more that we can do. Following the work we've been doing on the stock take, revisiting the strategic priorities, there are a number of common themes that have been highlighted which I will want to work on over the coming new financial year. This will include reviewing the objectives, ensuring that we are drawing out the cross-cutting initiatives more explicitly, and reviewing some of the key performance measures and indicators we use. And it's likely that any significant changes will be effective from Q2 at the earliest of this new financial year. So that's all I wanted to say with respect to the presentation. Happy to hand back to the Chair for any comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Obviously, this report is for noting only, but does anyone have any questions on the contents or any comments on it? Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, I've got a question. It's a topic that 2 years ago was something we were quite concerned about. And it's to do with the wait time for a call and the abandoned calls rate. So I'm actually looking at the diagram on page 26. So it looks as though there's an increase in the number of calls, 21% increase, and we think that might be because of inquiries about council tax bills going out. And that's given as one of the reasons, I think, for the 1 minute 52 second wait time on average. That's average wait time of 1 minute 52 seconds. It doesn't actually say at the bottom of that, though, whether that's an increase or a decrease, but I'm guessing because of the text, that's actually an increase in the average call time. And we've also got an increase to 12% in the abandoned calls rate. So, I mean, that's presumably people who've waited for a lot longer than the average of 1 minute 52 seconds and have finally got fed up and hung up. So this is something that a couple of years ago we said that we had to concentrate on, and I think we quoted a lot of people in business who expect 6 rings and the phone should be answered. And I don't know how many rings are in 2 minutes, but it's a hell of a lot. So I just wondered whether there's anything more that we can do to try and improve that performance.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. Yes, and indeed I recall sitting in front of yourselves talking about performance back in 2017 when I first joined, and average call rates were well above 3 minutes at some points, and abandonment rates were significantly higher. We've obviously done a lot of work in that intervening period to bring those call rates down and the abandonment rates down. Just to provide some reassurance, the statistics and the data that you can see there is as a genuine consequence of increased demand during that quarter four particularly, and that is because we see a tremendous increase in the volume of calls. Prior to that quarter, we would see averages of perhaps 300 a day. During quarter four, particularly when we issue the council tax bills that obviously go to all residents across both districts, we can see up to 900 calls a day, and that's obviously, you know, on some occasions nearly doubling the number of days, and we don't have the capacity that we can double the number of members of staff within the contact centre to take those calls. What we do is mitigate the demand by making sure that the bills have lots of information on them that hopefully try and answer some of the questions. And we also do have an increase in members of staff who come and work for us during that period to try and deal with the additional demand. Colleagues who have previously worked in the contact centre who are otherwise employed in different jobs, we get back on secondment to help us with our most busy times. And what I would say as well is that if we look at the entire year, our abandonment rate is below our average for that particular period and below our target, so 9% for the whole of the financial year. And our average wait time for the whole year was 1 minute 16 seconds. So again, within our target and obviously lower than the quarter four performance. So it's something that we absolutely take seriously, and we want to reduce as much of the demand that comes in and answer the calls as quickly as possible. But realistically, the fact that we see those peaks at that particular point in time, which are generated by council tax demands, also housing rent letters that are sent during that period, and increases in the number of calls we get around election time as well, will undoubtedly have an impact on the numbers that come in. Thank you.
Okay, can I come back on that? If we actually know that there are periods that are going to result in higher call volumes, you mentioned election periods and council tax bills going out, in your professional opinion, is there anything that we could actually do? Is it a resource issue? I mean, for a man in the street, it's just another person in the call centre who can share answering the phone type of thing. I'm sure it's not as simple as that. But is there something that we can do? Because it just seems to me that if it was a response time of 30 seconds to a minute or something, that's not too bad. But 2 or 3 minutes, and bearing in mind this is an average, so there may well be people, I tend to be one of these people, who, if I'm asked to wait, I don't hang up because I think my turn is about to come, so I keep holding on. And I did it, funnily enough, calling the council when we were in Hadleigh, and I waited for 12 minutes, by which time I was actually in the offices, so there was no point in apologising to the officer that I was late for a meeting because I was actually there. So I presume that in these averages there are some quite high figures where people might hang on and hang on and hang on. They might be hanging on the phone for 5 or 6 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, there will be some, you know, as averages work, there will be a number of people who have waited longer than that average, but there'll also be quite a high proportion of those people who have waited significantly less. And as we saw throughout the period, in earlier quarters, most of our calls were answered within about 30 seconds if you looked at the actual number of callers rather than the average. It does come down to resources, and as I say, we do plan ahead and try and secure additional resource at our most busiest times. But with the greatest will in the world, when it comes to a Monday morning at 9 o'clock, we'd have to have a significant number of people to be able to answer those phones, to be able to deal with that demand at that particular time. So our focus is about ensuring that we try and mitigate the demand that comes in, so making sure that information is clear and accessible when it's sent out. We've also obviously introduced the chatbots as well to try and take demand away, albeit that's only for certain services at the moment, but something that we will look to explore to roll out over other services as well. And I think as well it's a reflection on the fact that, you know, during this period of time, lots more people were at home and perhaps paying a bit more attention to correspondence that they received through the council tax bills, for example, and we think that that accounts for some of the demand as well.
Thanks for that. Probably a good time to welcome Councillor McCraw to his portfolio, isn't it?
Councillor McCraw, did you want to say something?
Sarah has already covered one of the points because Councillor Arthey did make the very reasonable point, is there anything that can be done? And the chat box function is a step in that direction to do something. Right, it is only being launched in this quarter and specifically covering the environmental matters, but the aim is to extend that. It's in the bottom right hand corner of the front page of the website, and as you scan down the page it moves to that bottom right hand corner. It's always there. It looks like a little round robot face. It's worth having a look, at least for the environmental portfolio and so on. And I think it might be worth considering, because these are Q4 figures, it might be worth considering presenting some annualised figures with the Q4 figures, because obviously that will provide a context for the entire year, and that is something I think we can maybe look at in future presentations. But I'll have discussions with officers on that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holt and then Councillor Davis.
Yeah, just following on what Alistair said, really, I think if we had something to look back perhaps over the past 18 months, not necessarily in this report necessarily, but if perhaps it could be brought to Cabinet in a briefing, just so that we understand it better with that longevity. So 18 months might be an idea to give us a good idea how we've progressed or not, as the case may be. I will ask, sir, what's your ambition here from 1 minute 52? You want to get it down to a minute, and you want 5% abandonment? What would you consider? I appreciate that it's been a success to date and that it's coming down, but where would you anticipate having a baseline to say that I think we've done really, really well to get to that point and we can't go any lower?
Thank you, Councillor Holt. Ultimately, we'd like to be able to answer the phone as soon as anybody contacts us. So as low as a number that we can get to would be obviously our aspiration, accepting that, of course, people do want to contact us by telephone, and we're not going to be able to shift demand entirely away from our telephony services, and nor would we want to. So I think as much as averages are a useful indicator, it's also important for us to think about the resolution that we provide as well. So certainly our ethos within our customer strategy is about being able to answer the call in its entirety, and sometimes that might take longer. And what I don't want to do is drive behaviours within our staff whereby we're just trying to get through the calls as quickly as possible because we've got somebody waiting. So I think where we have it is about right at the moment, with accepting that 10% of people might choose to abandon their call, and that's not necessarily because they've waited over a minute and a half. They might decide that 30 seconds is too much for them to wait. So I think what we have at the moment is reasonable and a good reflection, albeit we always try to improve upon that.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor McCraw and then Councillor Davis.
I can just give a specific answer to targets. The target is set at 145. I'm looking at last year's figures. Just taking 2 quarters from last year, Q3 saw a response time of 1 minute 16 seconds. Or actually, that might be 1.16, but I suspect it's 16 seconds. And the following Q4 was 1:36, so under the 1:45. So we know it's possible to achieve just over a minute. If that's possible, it may be possible to get closer to a minute.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, thanks. Alistair was quicker than I was in finding the results. But I remember in 2017 working with Sarah, and it was an ambition to get under 2 minutes at that time. So I think it's a reflection of the good work that she and her team have done, and Lee has done as the portfolio holder before, to bring them down as they were last year. And of course, this year is a little bit different for a lot of us in a lot of ways. The only thing that I'm still a bit surprised at, knowing how much work has gone in, and I think the chat box is brilliant, and I think that's going to really, really help as it grows and the departments, is that the number of calls compared to the number of emails, because I know you've always strived to get people to not pick up the phone and to use other methods, the website, the email and everything like that. So do you think there's something more that can be done to tweak on that, as well as the chat box?
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Yes, absolutely. I think there's still lots of work that we need to do, particularly around our website and making that much more intuitive and easily navigation is improved on there. That's some of the feedback that we receive from our customers directly, is that they find it difficult to find things on our website. And that is part of our customer transformation programme, to look at that, to make improvements. So absolutely, I think there is more that can be done to see decreases. And we have seen a decrease in our telephony contact. If we look at year on year, we have seen a slight decrease in this year. And I think that's part and parcel of people going to the website more, and we've seen increases in email traffic as well. So I think there's a general trend there, but what we'd like to do is make sure that all of our channels are really easily accessible, and particularly our website is very clear, and people can find information on there readily.
Okay, if nobody else from the Cabinet has anything they want to ask, I know Councillor McLaren, you wanted to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, in this report, I'm very pleased to see about the digital skills training. Unfortunately, on the peninsula, which is where my ward is, there's very little support in terms of the libraries. I mean, it goes to Shotley, that's it. I was wondering how you're going to address this problem, because a lot of my residents are not very good digitally at all, and I do want them to be enabled, if you like, and empowered to participate in what is now routine communication with the council. So many of them can't do that. What plans do you have in place, or ideas? I'd certainly like to be involved in them. I brought this up before at a previous meeting. But I want to see, you know, some moving forward of that, because libraries are doing a good job, I understand that. But there's a big gap there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Absolutely. One of the key areas that we recognise is the importance of digital inclusion to all of our residents. And within our customer transformation programme, we do have a specific project that is all about in making sure people have better digital connectivity, as well as improving confidence around their skills and access. And we are working with Suffolk Libraries particularly on some projects to ensure that people can access laptops and iPads, for example, and can borrow those readily. But also, that's just part of the issue. It's about making sure that actually they've got the confidence and the skills to be able to do things online with confidence as we perhaps do. So we do have some programmes of work that we are working with other providers that I'll be happy to share some further information with you and with other councillors in the coming weeks and months, and that will be specifically aimed at raising digital skills across the whole of the two districts.
So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Well, if there is anything else that anyone wants to say, I just wanted to wrap up by saying certainly the format, we're getting used to this new format now, and it is excellent because it is highlighting very easily where we've areas where things still need further focus, and we've had quite a lot of chat around the customers' portfolio, but clearly it also shows quite clearly where we've done very well. There's some examples further on. the response to fly tipping, 99% of fly tipping cleared up so very quickly. The performance of the within the economy portfolio, particularly around the distribution of COVID grants, has been absolutely excellent, and all of this data is so easily and so readily visible here. Certainly for me, this format is excellent and does stimulate debate very quickly and very easily. Councillor Busby, you wanted to quickly come in and say something?
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were just talking about the customers to start with, but if we're going to go on to environment, you mentioned fly tipping, and there's 99% is a very good rate, but it would be better if it was 160 incidents of fly tipping were then sorted out and people were charged for fly tipping. Do we know how many of those 160 did result in a court appearance or a fine or anything like that?
Well, we do have prosecutions and we do publicise them when they happen, and indeed there was one last year that did result in a 6-month prison term. So we, as and when we can identify the perpetrators, we will do and we do prosecute and are successful in those prosecutions. But it is identification, obviously. It does take fairly forensic analysis of the rubbish that's left, and there's not always stuff there that identifies the perpetrator. But we do prosecute when we can and go for it hard.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. It's just how many have we done? It may not always be a prosecution. It may be somebody turning up or writing a stiff letter or something. But
yeah, and I don't know. We'll probably have to get you those numbers afterwards. I don't think any of us have that information to hand.
Something that I'd be happy to talk to Cassandra about and get some further information.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Malvisi.
You've got bottles and you leave them beside the bottle bank, that's fly tipping. It's a process of education, because unfortunately fly tipping by definition is fly. And what we need to get hold of are the unscrupulous waste collectors who collect the tyres from various places and then dump them down a country lane. Sometimes we can actually find evidence of who they are, but mostly we don't, which is why we have to have this massive campaign. Thank you, Chair.
And also, of course, it's incumbent upon anyone who hires a private contractor to take away rubbish to make sure that they are a legitimate contractor and they're going to dispose of it responsibly rather than just take it around the corner and dump it, because the responsibility is still with the original owner of the rubbish as well as whoever took it away.
Absolutely, and it comes back to education. People don't realise that if they're the waste producer, they have a legal responsibility to ensure that they hand that waste to a fully licensed waste handler, and that it goes to a properly licensed waste site.
Councillor Holt.
I think it's more ignorance than education. I think most people that do this are fairly well educated. They're just ignorant to the point and just do not want to pay.
Councillor McCraw.
There's a fly tipping reporting tool, is there not? Which has just been announced, and it's available for use on a mobile phone, and you can upload the photograph and the location and send it in direct, similar to the SCC Highways reporting tool, but I hope for a little bit quicker.
And I think also it uses, 3 words as location, so it's easy for anyone to use.
Yes, that's the system, I believe. But even so, it's still, you can map the location, you can take a picture, and information is key. The other thing, of course, is if the general public become more aware of this, there's a better chance of catching any of the people carrying it out. And that's, I think, going to be crucial.
Okay, everyone. Well, thanks for that. As I stated, this item's for noting. Before we move on to the next item, we are going to take a 2-minute break while we can move things around a bit. So if we can pause the YouTube transmission for a couple of minutes. Okay, welcome back everyone, and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is paper. I'll back up my agenda now, further down. It's item 10, which is paper BCA 2141, the SIL Expenditure Programme for June 2021. And I'll invite the Cabinet Member for Planning to introduce this report. So, Councillor Arthey.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, you will all be familiar with the format for the SIL Expenditure Programme reports. This one contains an update on progress on decisions in bid rounds 1 to 6, which you'll be familiar with because we always give you the information going back to the start of the implementation of SIL. You've also got in the list emerging projects for future consideration, which are currently developing. There are 2 decisions for you today. They are firstly the bid for Holbrook High School, which is an increase in capacity from 590 to 600 pupils. The cost of the bid is £237,750 from the Local Infrastructure Fund, and that's out of a total project cost of £292,110. So there's a balancing capital contribution from the County Council there of £54,360. The project is to increase the capacity at Holbrook Academy from 590 to 600 secondary age pupils, and this is an additional education provision which will be achieved through the reconfiguration of the existing science lab facilities and with part of the science hub being relocated to the caretaker's bungalow. I'm not quite sure what the caretaker thinks of that, but that's the proposal. The need for the additional secondary age pupil places is derived from committed growth within the area. That's principally Stutton and Chelmondiston, where a total of 72 additional dwellings have been approved. So the project will deliver infrastructure needed in terms of secondary school places, and that's in line with those granted permissions. The project is the first pupil place extension of a school using SIL funds in Babergh, although you're probably aware of the fact that Mid-Suffolk have had some. The amount of SIL budget is fixed at the cost per pupil place. So that's contained in government guidance from the Department for Education. And as the total cost of the project exceeds this figure, as I said, Suffolk County Council have contributed from their budget to make up the difference to the total project cost of $292,000. It's classed as essential infrastructure within the infrastructure delivery plan, and this project involving the creation of 10 additional places is part of the overall expansion of the school contained within the infrastructure funding statement, used to be called our infrastructure list, for the council. Consultation has been carried out with Holbrook Parish Council and the ward member and the county councillor. This is in line with the provisions of our SIL framework. Their summarised responses are Parish Council. They wanted an extension of time to consider the SIL bid. A small extension was granted, but as far as I'm aware, no response was received. The ward member is Mary McLaren, who had no objection to the bid, and the county councillor, Simon Hadleigh, gave full support to the bid. There's a little bit more that I wanted to say about this, because I'm aware that some members may recall that there were some fairly localised views about the loss of the shared leisure facilities at the school. This is to do with Abbeycroft and the council. Following this, a meeting took place between our officers, Suffolk County Council education officers, and the headmaster. Issues about the education need for the school arising from new housing development at Stutton and Chalmondiston, as I mentioned. That was discussed along with the loss of the shared leisure facilities at the school and the impact on the community, and also the allocation of students attending the school from outside the peninsula. You've probably heard over the past few months comments regarding the fact that there are quite a few students bussed in from out of district. But I will say that we are firstly not the Department of Education, so we don't fix the figures for student places, nor do we run the Holbrook School, and nor do we determine its intake or manage its facilities. So we do have with us today Joe Fellows from the County Council Schools Infrastructure Programme Manager, I think, but I'm afraid I've only really twigged just recently who Joe is because she keeps looking at me. So, Joe. And if there are any specific questions about the County Council's need for these places, perhaps you can ask her about the cost of the places. And I'm sure she'll also be able to answer questions about how children are bussed in from out of what used to be called a catchment area, or in this case, even from outside of district. The second bid is at Preston St Mary, and it's a village hall extension to provide improved kitchen facilities and indoor toilets. The cost of the bid is £109,000, and that's from the local infrastructure fund. The total cost of the project here is £196,086, with other funds being sought from other sources by the parish council, or probably by the village hall committee actually. Those of you that were here in 2018-19 will probably remember this bid, and those of you with eagle eyes probably spotted in the report in the summary of bids round 1 to 6. I think it's on page 147, I think. Bid reference B0718 was the original bid for Preston St Mary Village Hall. It's to provide kitchen facilities and indoor toilets. The Village Hall is an ex-Church of England school, and had 2 outdoor toilets, one for boys and one for girls. And although they've been updated a little bit, they still have outdoor toilets. And the kitchen facilities are best described as a large cupboard. So the 2 things that they're in most need of is indoor toilets and proper kitchen facilities. The Village Hall, in common with a lot of small villages, the Village Hall is the social hub of the village, and the project will enable much needed improvements which will increase the use of the expanded facilities, and there is evidence of wide community support for the proposal, and the project is ready to go with a new planning permission granted in 2020. I will just mention the previous bid and what happened. This was previously approved in the spring of 2019, I think at the last Cabinet meeting before the elections. There are a number of different circumstances that have conspired to leading to, I suppose, a lack of commencement. There was COVID last year, there was an issue with the planning consent. There was probably a tiny little bit of, I don't know, tardiness in getting the project off the ground, I suppose. And then when COVID hit, I guess they started to panic. So the funding was reserved, which is what we do. That was £130,091. And because that bid offer lapsed, that money has effectively come back to us. So the framework has changed slightly. You'll remember that we used to allow up to 100% in bids. Now we have put a £75,000 and 75% limit on community infrastructure bids. This is one. So the previous 2019 bid was for 100% funding. And to enable the project to now proceed, the Village Hall Committee in Preston St Mary have secured several different forms of funding to contribute, and the amount requested from the SIL funds is now £109,000. So the amount that they're seeking from us has reduced and represents now 64% of the total project cost. So it comes in well under 75%. However, it is still above £75,000. So were we to be looking at this with a clean sheet of paper now, I think we would be encouraging them to seek even further funding from elsewhere because of our new limits in our SIL framework. However, what I'm asking you today is that given that it's below 75% and given that it represents a saving from the offer that we'd made to them before, that you approve the £109,000, which will enable the project to finally go ahead. So on that one, the consultation has been carried out with Preston St Mary Parish Council, who are wholly supportive. The ward and county councillor, Robert Lindsay, I was the ward councillor for Babergh up until 2019 and offered my full support to the scheme and appeared at Cabinet to speak on it, as you may remember. And Robert Lindsay was the county councillor at the time and offered his full support. We should really have had an additional response from Robert, who's now the district councillor and the county councillor for Preston St Mary. I reminded him of that yesterday, and he's emailed through to the infrastructure team and to myself 2 emails actually, one offering full support as the county councillor and the other one offering full support as the district councillor. So once again, I'm proposing approval. So that's paragraph 3, 3.1 and 3.2. And I'll ask for a seconder. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Osborne. Okay, members of the Cabinet, we've got these 2 items. One, I guess, is probably going to require more discussion than the other. But if we can start with questions before we actually move into debate on the relative merits of these. So to open questions, Councillor Davis, you have a question.
Together or two separate? Because there are 2 separate SIL bids.
We can take. I'm happy to take them separately if.
Yes, please.
If everyone's. Yeah, we'll take them separately. Okay. Are there any questions, Councillor Busby?
The Preston St Mary bid. Can I ask how much SIL Preston St Mary Village have collected for themselves?
Can I just access that on the SIL page? Answer the question in about a minute. Is that okay?
Yes, that one. Happy for that. We'll wait for that one. Does anyone else have a question at this stage? Councillor Davis. It'll take Councillor Arthey a while, I think. So ask your question.
I'm not sure thank you. I'm not sure who I'm addressing it to, but I want more details, probably you, Joe, about the Holbrook bid, in terms of who's actually going to be using it, what sort of community benefit it will bring, and why it's there. The caretaker one, I'm not. Well, I think it's sort of lumped in, but the science block mainly.
Did you want me just to start with an answer?
Well, you start, Councillor Arthey.
Well, just to point out, I mean, Councillor Davis did mention the benefit to the community. Just to remember, this is not a community bid. This is an education bid. Okay.
Yeah, I understand that, Councillor Arthey. Joe, would you like to respond? Thank you.
Yeah. So, in terms of what accommodation we're providing, at the moment the school only has 4 practical science labs. With the increase of pupils, they really need 5 labs. So what we'll be doing is refurbishing and remodelling the accommodation to provide that 5th practical science lab. And the space that takes up is an area that they call the hub, which is for sort of one-to-one support. So that facility will then go into the vacated caretaker's bungalow, which is then being refurbished to provide those spaces. So in terms of just touching back on the community benefit, the only scope really is for the science labs to be used by the feeder primary schools, which is something that the head is keen that they would come in and use those. But in terms of extended use of the community facilities, they're not really appropriate for that use, particularly in the caretaker's bungalow, because they're sort of one-to-one support spaces which would have, you know, potentially sensitive material in them. I would have to check back off the top of my head.
From Needham Market to Felixstowe.
I do have some that he's named, if you wouldn't mind just giving me a moment to look at.
Again, sorry?
I do have some that he's named specifically, if you wouldn't mind if I just...
Okay, yeah, but there are 23 feeder schools to Holbrook, and it's academy, isn't it? It's not high school, it's an academy.
It's not maintained school. Yeah.
Okay. One of the issues, well, again, this is a question. What is the percentage of the people that are from outside, if you like, the catchment area, compared to those that on the peninsula?
Okay, so out of catchment pupils, there is currently about 250 out of catchment pupils, but this extension of 10 places is very much for the developments that have occurred within the catchment area, within Stutton and Chelmerdiston. So through the planning responses, we've responded to say that these additional places will be needed for in-catchment children, and that is what we're building the capacity in for.
Wouldn't it be fair to say if the people weren't coming from Felixstowe and Needham Market, the school would be more than large enough to accommodate the new people that come into the peninsula and future growth as well?
It would, and if the school, if more pupils come in, then it would potentially push new pupils coming from out of catchment back to their local schools. But because there has been historically a lot of capacity in the school, it's drawn parents in from other areas, and that has actually helped to kind of sustain the school over the last few years. I mean, it's grown from 480 to 586 in the last 3 years. Yeah. So those pupils have actually helped to sustain that school during that period, really, and give it that sort of critical mass. But it's fair to say that if, as more development comes forward and there's more demand within catchment, it would then limit the amount of places that were available for out-of-catchment pupils to come in.
And are the county council able to control that in terms of...
We don't control the admissions for Holbrook Academy because they're an academy, they control that themselves.
So the academy can just carry on adding more and more people from Felixstowe, Needham Market, Claydon...
Theoretically they could, but they want to be a school that caters for the need from the community, so it wouldn't really benefit them to do that, I don't think.
I know you know the school quite well, but would you describe the entrance to the cabinet in terms of traffic, or just any entrance to it, the road, not walking around the back?
Yeah, it's it is fairly constrained, but I think for this limited number of additional pupils, which are within catchment, we don't really see that would sort of exacerbate any existing issues that are there. I think if the school needed to expand further, that would be something that we'd need to evaluate on its own merits, but for this expansion, we don't think that it's actually going to cause any further issues in that entrance area.
But this would take it to 600, and as you've said, there's nearly 300, 250 more coming from outside, and you'll be aware of the traffic issues and the complaints, and this will just exacerbate that, won't it?
It would, but that's not what this bid is addressing. And if we were to look at a further expansion there, as we do with all our other schools, we would undertake, an assessment of where those pupils are coming from, how they would be travelling, and whether there's any upgrade that is required to make entrances safe. So that may be needed, but that's not something that's considered within this bid because we don't think it's required for the 10 additional places.
Okay, so this takes it up to 600, but in the JLP, it could be that the school expands to 800. Do you really believe that's feasible, given the constraints it has?
It could be, but it's just important to note that those discussions need to be had with the leadership team at the school and the trustees. and those detailed discussions haven't happened. So theoretically it could, but those discussions about whether the school would want to accommodate those additional pupils have yet to be had.
Can I just clarify, because it is an academy and it is a trust, what relation the county council has with the trust?
A good working relationship, yeah?
I mean, legally, because some academies don't have any dealings with the LEA, do they?
We still maintain the responsibility to provide sufficient places, but in terms of the running of the school, they're not an LA maintained school. They access their maintenance funding direct from the DFE, so there isn't that kind of relationship that there would be with a maintained school.
So you don't control salaries or anything like that? No, okay. And one final question, sorry, is just how do the county council in general square off their environmental policy in terms of, oh sorry, I think somebody else wants to answer that. I'll step back, I've spoken enough, right. But thank you very much for your help.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks Councillor Davies. I think we were probably veering off the focus of this particular SIL bid here. Yeah, obviously we know about the proposals for the growth of the academy. There are the infrastructure delivery plan has, I think, 10 local site allocations which could deliver up to 170 dwellings, which will account for that expansion over the course of the next 15 years or so in the lifetime of the joint local plan. But we need to focus on this particular bid here and the purpose of the bid and the reasons for it. So, do you want to come back on Councillor
Busby?
Busby's?
I've just
yeah,
done a little bit of research for Councillor Busby. I'm sure he could have done it himself, but never mind. So the SIL pages indicate for Preston St Mary a total potential SIL contribution of £126,398.94. That potential contribution is coming from a development which Councillor Busby sits on committee. I'm not sure if it went to committee, this one, but it's a development opposite the village hall, which oddly enough is also contributing a new car park, a car park for the village hall. So £126,398.94. I'm guessing that what you were getting at was how much SIL is coming in from Preston St Mary if 109,000 is going out, and the answer is a bit more than we would be awarding them today.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. And just one final comment from me on the Holbrook. I think we'll arrange a briefing on academies. It's probably be a good idea if all members understood better how academies work in conjunction with the county council admissions policies, etc., and how that will affect us in terms of the planning authority and the authority with SIL funding. But, yeah, okay. Yeah, and then Councillor Busby, I think, wants to come back.
Okay. I mean, I can understand where Councillor Davies is coming from, but I think you've got to look at what the flip side of that argument might be, and that might be that the new houses are built on the peninsula and the children that are in those houses are going to come to Councillor Davies and they're going to say, how come my children can't go to Holbrook? And it's no good just saying, oh, well, that's because a load of guys from Felixstowe are going there. The point is we have to plan forward. And the SIL contributions are to provide the funding to provide the infrastructure. If you go back to the old days of Section 106, these details wouldn't be in front of us for discussion because there would have been a 106 contribution sought from the developer, it would have been handed over to the education authority as an education provision, and we wouldn't have any idea where it's going. So, I mean, in a way, we're sort of lucky that we've got the purse strings, but I don't think we should get too wrapped up in trying to do the Department of Education's job or Joe's job or trying to sort out some deal with regard to the shared use of the facilities there. This is about school places and it's about money that's being contributed by developers who are building houses on the peninsula where children will need a school place.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Busby, you wanted to come back on that earlier answer?
Yeah, don't necessarily agree with that at all, I don't think. Can I just ask, How much is the Academy contributing towards this?
The Academy is not contributing because they don't have the responsibility to provide the school places. In terms of maintaining the buildings, that's their responsibility, but providing the places remains our responsibility.
Okay, so and how do they get their revenue? Is it by so much per child?
Yes, yeah. So
okay, so we spend the money to build up the number of kids that can go there, and they increase their revenue because of our spend.
Their funding agreement with the DFE would change as a result of this, so it would increase from 590 to 600, and that's standard. Whether they're an academy or whether they're maintained, that they're funded for the number of children. But the reason that we pay is because we're responsible for providing those places. So we get basic need funding from government, and we get obviously developer contributions and other sources of funding, but it's our responsibility to make sure that we've got the funding to put those places in, the physical places.
Okay, I mean, I kind of agree with Clive and kind of agree with John that this is probably not part of the discussion for SIL, and we ought to have a session on the education. But it's bonkers where we're having 250 children being bussed in. How do they get there? I mean, the Strand's like a car park most of the morning. So how do the 250 kids get there? And if we do have the development at Shotley, we're going to have to tell them that they can't use a local school. They're going to have to go to somewhere like Felixstowe. I mean, the world's gone nuts. We're supposed to be cutting emissions. How are we going to do that when we've got half the world's parents ferrying children around the councils? No.
I understand your concern there, Councillor Busby, but we are veering off the subject at hand here in this particular SIL bid. The pupils or the future pupils on the Shotley Peninsula will be provided for, and as I said earlier, the infrastructure delivery plan shows how that provision will be provided at Holbrook. So, but that will be the focus of future SIL bids over the forthcoming years. So we're just looking at this one at the moment. Councillor McCraw.
It was answering the question you've just said. We're not talking about this anymore, so I'll withdraw my thought.
Thank you. All right. Does anyone else have any questions on this? Councillor Davis, do you have
there that they need to expand. I know they want to, and I think it'd be nice. Well, they think it would be nice, and we paid for it, and the council and the county paid for it. But what evidence is there? Because from what I can see, there is no evidence that they need to expand. They just want to do it because of higher pupil premium. You know, if they didn't keep recruiting from outside the catchment area, there wouldn't be any need to extend. So my question is, what evidence is there?
Chairman, I've got to say this, it's not a school application, it's an education authority application. It's the county council who have to provide the schools to meet the growth in the population. So I'm not quite sure that levelling the question at the school itself is the proper way to do it. We have, of course, got Jo here who can answer from the county council's point of view, but to be fair, I think she's already done that.
So the current school number on roll is 586, and through our pupil forecasting, we've estimated that up to 12 pupils would arise from the 3 developments that were mentioned. So therefore that feeds into our pupil forecast. Now they've been approved, and so therefore we think the additional places will be needed to take the school up to 600, and that's how the pupil forecasting works.
Need to increase the school capacity if you only carried on with people from the Shotley Peninsula or the immediate vicinity of the school.
But those children are already in the school, aren't they? So we're not...
There'll be a year, for example, there'll be a change in September. You know, and we need this education, totally agree. You know, the education say you can only take from within the catchment area, and then you can expand outwards, but within the numbers you've got already. I don't see the need to expand. That's why I'm asking what evidence there is for there to be, rather than the desire to have both.
Our evidence is through the pupil forecasts, and that's what we use to determine where places are required. So that's all I can offer, really.
The evidence is based on what, 40% coming from out of catchment?
Yeah, and out of catchment feeds into those people forecasts, not just, you know, across the county. That's how it's,
Thank you. You've answered my question to an extent, so I'm happy with that.
After all, we can't really discuss debate admissions policy at the academy. We'll pick that up at another time, and we'll get a better understanding of that. But I mean, there's a positive way of looking at this, Councillor Davis. We have on the peninsula a high school, an academy, which is proving to be very popular throughout the whole of southeast Suffolk. So, okay. Councillor Holt, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think we've taken this as far as we can take it. I think I can sense the frustration with two members behind me, but we're dealing with the policies that are in place, and we've just got to learn to live with that at the moment. If we do have a briefing on academies, I think we could all learn a lot more. But I think the officers explained fully the reasoning behind it, and I think we've just got to go with that for now. And if there's any amendments we'd like or opinions we'd like to express, we can do that at a briefing. But I think I'm certainly in favour of this, so I'm not quite sure where we were, whether it was approved or what, or whether it was a proposer or a seconder or wherever we are. Has it been seconded?
Councillor Osborne seconded.
Well,
we're still actually in questions, although we have moved into veered into debate, admittedly. But
I think we should just move on from it. I mean, the officers explained it. It's not satisfactory, I don't think, to members, but we are where we are.
Okay. Right. Well, if there are no other questions from members of the Cabinet, Councillor McLaren, as the ward member, do you have anything you want to ask?
I mean, obviously, for Holbrook Academy, this is a good day, and for the young people who are going to be educated there, you know, that is brilliant. I can understand Councillor Davis's concerns, and but at this moment, as Councillor Arthey said, we're looking at this as a development of a school, an education, and so as a ward member I supported that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Okay, well, we've had questions. Does anyone want to proceed any further in the debate, or should we move straight to the vote? I think we've probably exhausted the issues through the questions. Happy to go to vote? Councillor Arthey.
Just before you go to the vote, can I just say thank you very much to Jo for coming in. We anticipated that it might be quite useful to have her here to answer some detailed and specific questions. So thank you very much, Jo. And if I could also just say thank you to Christine and the team who pull all of this stuff together. You may or may not know, but Christine's not that well at the moment, so she couldn't come in this afternoon. She would have been here, but she can't be here. So in her absence, just a thanks, if Tom can pass that on, a thanks to the SIL team for putting all of the papers together for us again. Thank you.
And Tom didn't have to answer any questions on SIL. But thank you very much, Joe. That's great. Thank you. Okay, then we'll move to the vote. Separately.
Okay, members, so what we'll do is the first vote is for bid 2101, which is Preston, as detailed in recommendation 3.1 of the report. I will start that one for you now. Preston.
Sorry, this is the really cool.
Yes.
I thought we were in a debate with it before. Probably not. You can do it. No.
Thank you, members. Chair, that vote is 8-4, which is unanimous. So I'll now start the second vote, which is for bid B2014, which is Holbrook. And we will then move on to a third vote after this for recommendation 3.2. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 6 votes for and 2 votes against. So that vote is carried. And then the third vote, members, is for recommendation 3.2 as detailed in the report. And that is now in progress. Councillor Osborne, have you voted? Yeah. Oh, okay. It hasn't come through. Can I just take your vote verbally, please? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. That's 8 votes for, which is unanimous. Thank you.
Chair, sorry. Was the first one for Preston, was it 8-0? Was it? I don't know if you mentioned it. It was.
Yes.
Thanks, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right, Councillor Holt. Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, what was item 16 on your report, we're now going to cover now, as it's no longer a confidential item. So this is paper BCA 21.5, Spend Against the Climate Change and Biodiversity Earmarked Reserve. And I'll ask the Cabinet Member for the Environment to introduce this report. Councillor Malvisi.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just bear with me while I find all my bits. Right, this covers the work that we have to do in order to achieve an understanding of the biodiversity that we have in our district, and it covers the mapping work that we need to do. In July 2020, you recognised that the loss of natural habitat was greatly impacting on our wildlife. The combination is impacting on our climate change. In order to effectively manage this, we need to understand and enhance the wildlife corridors that exist, but also where we need to create new ones. Suffolk Biodiversity Information Service have offered £1,000 seed funding to support this work. In addition, they'll undertake initial network mapping as a pilot, part of the current remit to support both Babergh and Mid-Suffolk District Councils. And the mapping will cover public realm sites, local nature reserves and county wildlife sites. And the anticipated mapping costs, based on a joint proposal by SBIS and Suffolk Wildlife Trust, are £12,250, and a breakdown is shown in the table in Table 2 of the report. Once we have accurate mapping information, it will enable us to increase our understanding of the district's biodiversity resources by updating the county wildlife site register with a condition assessment. It will evaluate ecological assets within the public realm and opportunities for enhancement. Initiate a pilot mapping scheme to consider how sites with biodiversity value link into the wider ecological network surrounding the districts. I recommend that you please grant the funding.
Thank you, Councillor. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor McCraw. Okay, does anyone from the Cabinet have any questions on this report? All seems to be fairly straightforward, and I know we've all had a good chance to look at the contents and understand what we're trying to do with these two specific projects here. As Councillor Malvisi said, it's essential that we do have a good understanding of our biodiversity and also our tree cover. The mapping work and survey here will provide that and will put us in a good position moving forward. Does anyone have anything they wish to add? Councillor Arthey.
Thank you. It's a question about this, about the tree canopy surveying, and I'm not quite sure what areas are being covered, because at one point in the report I think it talks about some Suffolk Wildlife Trust survey work, and then there's this satellite imaging which appears to be able to identify which trees are where, just simply by the satellite image. So I presume that's district-wide, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Councillor Arthey.
Does anyone have anything else they wish to add? I just got one tiny point I just noted, and that's in paragraph 4.4 and 4.9. The first one refers to Appendix B and the second one refers to Appendix C. They should actually be Appendices A and B respectively, not B and C, but that's a minor issue, and I think if we can get that corrected, that would be great. But apart from that, the funding as listed here, it's these are reasonable, and we do have the reserve that's set aside, and this funding comes from that reserve. So exactly the sort of thing that the reserve was set up to provide. So we're all happy to move to the vote. Councillor McCraw?
I just wanted to point out that I think it's significant that we'll have outputs from the tree canopy survey as soon as September of this year. And I think that speed is something that, has been overdue, and I know it's been discussed for many years. So very, very much in favour. It's much easier to assess the canopy if you can see the canopy. Yes, that's true.
It's easier to identify the species, isn't it? Okay, we'll move to the vote now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members, you may need to scroll down slightly on your ModGov app to see this one. It is now in progress. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 8 votes for. That's unanimous.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on then to the next item, which is paper BCA 21-6. Again, further spend against the Climate Change and Biodiversity Earmarked Reserve, this time for water filtration. And I'll ask Councillor Malvisi to introduce this report.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very pleased to bring this to Cabinet. The purpose of the report is to get your approval to draw down from the Climate Change and Biodiversity dedicated earmarked reserve to install what's called a backwash pool water cleaning system at Kingfisher Leisure Centre. This will recover waste heat and recycle water. Water is a valuable resource that is quite scarce. Currently, the leisure centre uses a standard sand filtration system which requires cleaning on a regular basis, done by a process called backwashing. The system uses a lot of water and is highly energy inefficient. The spend of 24,900 comprises 21,600 from earmarked reserves and 3,000 from Suffolk Climate Change Partnership. This will give the leisure centre a new pool water backwash cleaning system using electrocoagulation. The system significantly reduces water consumption by reusing wastewater, but also reduces energy consumption and carbon emissions by reducing the need to heat pool top-up water. So you get a saving on energy and water. The new system will deliver the following benefits. It will reduce the annual CO2 emissions from between 6.4 and 8.6 tonnes per annum. It will reduce pool energy consumption between 35,200 and 46,900 kilowatts per annum. Reduce water consumption between 1,500 and 2,000 metre cubed per annum. Demonstrate a practical corporate carbon reduction strategy to the UK leisure industry, and it contributes towards a carbon neutral building. And yet again, it makes Babergh a leader, not a follower. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. May I have a seconder, please? Councillor Arthey. Any questions from anyone? Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of a question. You always go question and then debate, but it's a kind of a little bit of each, isn't it, sometimes? So, firstly, I feel a bit for Councillor Malvesi. It was a couple of months ago she had to get her head around hydrogenated vegetable oil and hydro-treated vegetable oil, again to do with reducing our carbon emissions. In that particular circumstance, the change that we were proposing was actually more expensive for us as a council, but of course it was far and away the biggest contributor to our carbon emissions. Now I think we come to the second largest single contributor to our carbon emissions, which is our swimming pools. And the interesting thing about this, I think, is that not only do we address carbon emissions, but we also actually have the potential here to make a saving. And as Councillor Malvesi says, it's not only a saving in terms of energy consumption, it's also a saving in terms of water, because I do kind of understand these backwash systems, and to put it in simple terms, when you backwash a pool, you basically suck out a whole load of the water that you've heated to swimming temperature and put it through the filter backwards to rinse it out, so it all gets thrown away, having heated it up. And it being perfectly clean water, it then just goes through the filter backwards and gets thrown away. So there are real savings here. I don't know though if I mean they're not huge, but they are quantifiable, I think, aren't they, Councillor Malvesi, in terms of water and energy?
Yes, they are, Councillor Arthey. As you say, they're not huge. But gas and electricity costs would be reduced between 1.1% and to 1.5%, which doesn't sound a lot. But then when you see their total energy bills as a multiplier, it is quite a substantial saving.
Yes.
Councillor Arthey,
Thank you. Did you mute me, did you? No. Okay. Yeah, I think the other part of the question really was about water, because we're talking large volumes of water here with a pool that size that's backwashed once or twice a week. We're talking about quite large volumes. I think, am I right that 1,000 litres is a cubic metre? Is that right? Yeah, because I think there's reference in the report to litres and to cubic metres. So 1,000 litres, I think, is a cubic metre and weighs a tonne. So we're talking about a lot of water here, aren't we?
To put it in layman terms, it's about the equivalent of 11 households' water consumption per annum.
Yeah, actually, as you stated earlier, Councillor Malvesi, between 1,500 and 2,000 cubic metres. Do we know, you quoted the percentages for gas and electricity usage savings. What percentage of the total water usage does that 2,000 cubic metres represent? Do we have that as a percentage?
No, I don't have that percentage, and I don't have my calculator with me either.
Okay, we'll try and get an answer to that later, outside, yeah. Okay. Councillor Osborne, and then Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a great way forward, very innovative and demonstrates Babergh's commitment to climate change, so I certainly support it. My question is, I see from the report that there's going to be quite a saving in utilities, and obviously that includes the saving on the water as well. Will Babergh District Council benefit from any of these savings in regards to the financial side?
Can Councillor Mavisi, do you have...
It should do, but I'll ask Sharon if she can step in.
Sorry, Councillor McCraw, you wanted to come in.
I've got it here. It's Table 1 on page 172.
That's what I thought it was somewhere.
And the Table 1 shows a net annual saving of £5,855 minimum, maximum saving £8,437, and for a capital expenditure of 21,650, that seems like a very decent return on that capital expenditure in terms of an annual saving. It fundamentally could pay for itself in as little as 3 years, but certainly would do so within 4. So, I mean, and if any time you get a return like that on a capital investment, you've got to say, yes, please.
No, but the savings are for Abbeycroft.
No, they're not. They are savings that are provided according to 6.3 to Babergh District Council. The responsibility for payments of both the electricity and gas supply have been transferred across from our current leisure provider, Abbeycroft, to ourselves. So effectively, this is a good deal.
Thank you, Councillor McCraw. Councillor Davis, did you...
Yeah, thank you. I think this is great, obviously, and I think it's important that every decision we take goes towards our carbon neutral target for 2030. So in that respect, and thank you for the figures, but in that respect, could you tell me how much this will offset all the carbon emissions being for children being bussed in from all different parts of Essex, Felixstowe, Needham Market, other parts of Ipswich into the district? It's a serious question. We've said we've got a carbon neutral target, and yet we're making policies that encourage bus journeys from all sorts of the areas to the district. You can send me the answer later.
I take the point you've made, but we clearly don't have that comparison at the moment.
No, I'll take that later. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions from anyone else? Yeah, Councillor Malvisi, yeah, do you want to say something?
I'd just add, yes, please. To further enthuse the Cabinet, it ticks off a lot of boxes, because it's going to reduce costs for a leisure facility which is bound to impact on the residents of our community as we come out of COVID and start to live a full life. So it ticks a well-being box. It's going to reduce costs, which hopefully the community will benefit from.
Yeah, thank you. Well, again, we've kind of veered into debate at the same time as questions, but does anyone else wish to make any further comments about this? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Councillor, for identifying that for me. It shows I didn't read the report properly, I think. So I stand corrected. But what I will say is, yeah, you're right, there is a good saving for Babergh, and in regards to the utilities. So I would hope that perhaps in a few months' time, when we start to see the benefits of these savings, we can look to reintroducing the free swimming again at the Kingfisher, as we had before, and take advantage of those savings that we'll be getting from this investment. Thank you.
Yes, I quite agree, but also we've got to remember this. This is, although this is something we're financing, we're investing, we're installing it. It is a trial. We'll be learning from this, and hopefully it will be the success that we anticipate, and it'll be something that can be rolled out to other leisure centres, not just to Hadleigh within Babergh, but also to the other districts and boroughs in the county, because I'm sure they're all watching this. The Suffolk Climate Change Partnership has helped fund this project, so they'll all be interested in the outcome. Councillor Holt.
To be fair, you've just basically answered my question, really, which was if this is a success, then we'll be able to hopefully sort of expand that and go to Hadleigh and make even more savings. But you pronounced what you said, so thank you.
Okay. Right. Councillor Busby.
Yes, this point about the responsibility for payments of both electricity and gas supply has been transferred across from Abbeycroft to Babergh District Council. Okay, we benefit from the savings of it, but how much? I mean, that's only the savings. Presumably, we're picking up the rest of the costs. When did that happen? Has it reduced our contribution to Abbeycroft? I don't recall that coming to us.
The Chief Executive is going to give an answer to that.
I'll give
it's a fair
I'll give
point.
Anna an answer, and if I talk for long enough, I'm conscious that Cass Clements, the Assistant Director, will probably email me an answer as well, because she's watching online. So I'm conscious we had to move it across as part of shifting to green tariff. That's the extent of my knowledge. So as part of an earlier decision in order to ensure that we could access green tariff energies, that whilst it sat with Abbeycroft wasn't possible, but would be possible if it was part of a contract with us. But I'm hoping in the meantime Cass will have emailed me an answer, and in which case I'll come back in if I get one. Oh. See, it worked beautifully.
Yeah. Thank you, Arthur. Have you got one?
Oh. There we go, sorry. So yeah, as Arthur said, it was part of the green tariff. We have picked up the cost for those utility bills, but we will be looking to mitigate that with our partners through the management fee and lease arrangement in terms of reclaiming that back. So Babergh won't be out of pocket.
Thank you, Sharon. Councillor McCraw.
In that case, if we're going to mitigate it, are we also going to pass on the mitigation of the savings that we're about to make with the backwash scheme? I know that's been technical, but could we just keep the savings and just pass them on the costs?
I don't know if we can, but I'll take it away. Thank you.
Okay. Interesting, yeah. Okay then, everyone. I think then we're probably ready to move to the vote on this item. Okay, thanks, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the vote is now in progress. Thank you. That's 8 votes for, Chair.
Thank you. Right, moving on to the next item. There is no published paper for this. This is the Suffolk Waste and Recycling Consistency and Household and Business Recycling Consultation. And I'll ask the Cabinet Member for the Environment to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. I'm asking Cabinet to support the formation of a cross-party working group consisting of myself and a member from the opposition. I think that we're looking for 4 people on Babergh and 4 people on Mid-Suffolk. The group needs to be constituted to consider the issues raised in the consultation document for a response to be submitted by the Assistant Director for Environment and Commercial Partnerships under her delegated powers. There is a link to the consistency consultation site, which includes the documents below, Now, I don't know that anybody wants to take a note of the web link right now, but I can give it afterwards. In December 2018, the government published its 25-year environmental plan, the Resource and Waste Strategy, better known as ROWS. This strategy forms part of the Environment Bill due for its third reading in Parliament, which we hope will be the autumn. The waste section of the plan has three main elements: consistency in collections, extended producer responsibility, and the implementation of a deposit return scheme. The underlying principles of the strategy included in the elements above are to achieve a 65% recycling rate and to ensure that the polluter pays and that we all generate less waste. The plan is for the implementation of the strategy to start during 2023. Consistency in collections will have significant and far-reaching implications for the future of the waste services local authorities provide to their residents and businesses. Proposals in this consultation include implementing the following: weekly food waste collections, curbside collections of glass, increasing the types of materials we collect in our recycling collections, and changes to the garden waste collections. Naturally, we will continue to work together with all the other Suffolk councils through the Suffolk Waste Partnership on considering the implications included in the consultation and formulating a response. However, with such far-reaching implications for the services that we as a district council provide, we felt it crucial that we set up this working group to consider the constitution and formulation of a response on behalf of Babergh. We've got lots of time to do it in. We've got till the 4th of July to submit our responses. A provisional slot, therefore, is booked for the first group meeting this week on the 10th, which is Thursday. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. May I have a seconder for this, please? Councillor Davis. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Busby.
Yeah, when we discussed this before, I raised the concern that we won't be including in that working group people that might be adversely affected by the changes in the policy, such as single-parent families or families with a large number of children, people who live in flats, etc. What have we done? Are we going to include somebody from perhaps our tenants forum on this working group? Is there anything other than councillors on it?
Councillor Mavisi.
I have to say that question hasn't arisen because everything's happened so quickly. The information regarding this came fairly recently. I think the Suffolk Waste Partnership have had a meeting and discussed a bit of it, and we're trying to get the working group together to progress because we've only got till the 4th of July.
Yeah, the consultation periods are very, very short. The two other consultations on the deposit return scheme and the extended producer responsibility, Suffolk Waste Partnership has already provided those because they had to be in by the 4th of June. But this is the third consultation on collection consistency. But we don't have time. We just got to focus on this and as councillors and get our response in and coordinate it with the rest of our partners in the county as soon as possible. Councillor Arthur, you've probably got more.
Well, yeah, I mean, the point is that the people we need a response from are the people that do the collecting, really, which is us. So, I mean, all the tenants do is, like any other householder, you could have a householder group, but I don't quite see the advantage of that because they don't collect it, they put it out, they present it for us. So, I mean, I think it's quite interesting that the government have finally come around to look at consistency. It's 22 years ago now that the authorities in Suffolk got together to try and deliver a proper strategy with consistent collection across Suffolk. because we identified that as people moved from one area to another, they were confused by whether they needed a wheeled bin, a metal bin, a series of black plastic bags, whether they could recycle dry recyclables, whether they could recycle garden waste, all that sort of stuff. So we set a strategy in 2001, I think our strategy was published, and we achieved complete consistency. There's a little bit of a difference in bin lid colours, I think, between Mid-Suffolk and the rest. But other than that, we got consistency across the whole of Suffolk. So it is really, really important. You know, the other problem we've got now is of course, while everything's consistent in Suffolk, people don't move within their county boundaries, they move to other administrative authorities. So you only have to go across into Essex and you find that there's a completely different series of recyclable products that you can present, and in a completely different way. So, you know, while we've relied on paper banks, bottle banks and things, a lot of other authorities haven't. We've majored on dry recyclables, and a lot of other authorities were slow to catch up on that. And then you've got the whole issue of food waste as well, and whether that has to be collected or not by all authorities and in all areas. So I think it's quite important, and I think it's quite important for us to respond as a collection authority. I don't want to disagree with Councillor Busby, but I don't think there's a whole lot of point in bringing the world and their dogs into the conversation. It's an open consultation, so if people feel strongly enough about it, they can respond, especially, I presume, towards things like packaging and stuff like that, which are the things that present households with the problem. So yeah, I'm fully supportive of Councillor Malvese's proposal for a small working group to put some sort of a response together. And as she said, the Suffolk Waste Partnership are responding to all of the elements of the consultations as well.
Thank you, Councillor Arthey. Does anyone else? Councillor McCraw and then Councillor Busby and then Councillor Osborne.
I just wanted to ask if the prospective members for both councils have been lined up, given that you're on a clock.
Well, we've got Councillor Malvese and Councillor Arthey, and we'll need somebody from the Lib Dem group, so if Councillor Busby could discuss that with his group leader, and then after this meeting, assuming we agree to this, then we'll contact Lee Jameson and ask him for a Green representative. Councillor Busby, you were next, and then Councillor Osborne.
I'm glad to see it's going to be a very diverse group. 4 middle-aged white pensioners. Sorry, Clive.
We don't have much choice, do we?
Look, it's all well and good Clive talking about the colour of the bins. I mean, that seems to be the least important part of it. It's what people think they're going to need collecting. If we talked about reducing the frequency collection of the black bin, or the whatever it is bin, the residual bin, because we're taking food waste out of it. Well, that doesn't necessarily reduce the amount of stuff that's in that bin for some families. If you've got young children that are chucking in nappies, dozen nappies a day, you'll soon fill up your black bin, and to have that lying around for an extra week or 2 weeks because 4 white middle-aged pensioners decided that they didn't need their black bins collected quite so frequently, it's not right. That's why I think you need a diverse group. But if we can't do that because of time, then I think we should ask the Tenants Forum to put forward a response. You say that anybody can respond. Well, I didn't know that was. I mean, we were going to be asked for this.
Okay, Councillor Busby, it is an interesting point. Perhaps we could, in the next day or so, see what, look at the feasibility of that, but I don't think we can make any promises at this stage. Councillor Osborne, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, on that point, I think we do need to involve our tenants. I think they'll have a lot to say on this particular aspect. We do have problems on some of our developments with the collection of waste, and I think it would help and it would empower them if they feel they'd had a voice in how we move forward on this. However, I am conscious of the fact that we are limited for time, but there's no reason why the corporate manager of tenant services couldn't set up a tenant board meeting for them to be given the information and they to feed into the group that's meeting at dates to respond to the consultation. But I think Councillor Busby's absolutely right. We should be involving the tenants.
Councillor Holt.
I disagree. I think that this is about all our residents, not just our tenants, and I think it's our residents that are the key to this. And as I spoke before when we had a small briefing on this, what we need to ensure is we get a policy in place that our residents will buy into, because if we don't, we're going to have a disaster. If there's a change in collection or a change in how they separate their rubbish, then it needs to be brought in with our residents, not just our tenants. So I would stress it's all our residents, not just tenants.
Councillor McCraw, did you?
Well, is our being elected as councillors is this not part of our job as councillors to make responses on behalf of the council? And if Cabinet can't take the lead in that, where else could it happen?
I think we can all get some feedback from residents either via our parish councils or other routes into residents within our particular wards and feedback information and views to the working group. But ultimately it has to be the working group that puts forward our response. But sourcing its information from as wide a range of people as it can in the time available. Councillor Malvisi.
Just to, thank you, Chair. Just to point out that the consultation is available online, so residents can, electors, members of the community can go online. I will circulate that information to Cabinet.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, if there's nothing else, Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, I suppose I've got to say something else in response to what Dave has said. We really don't need to have all different users of the service come in to tell us what they put in their bins. We do regular bin analysis. We know exactly what's being presented. We know what we have to sort out that's in the blue bin recycling that shouldn't be there, that gets rejected. We know what goes into the energy from waste plant. We do regular bin analysis. We're not unaware of the number of nappies that go in, and I don't think that Dave ought to make the assumption that it's only young families that use things like that. He said, ho, 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 you get old and middle-aged people don't know about these sorts of things. Well, I've got to tell you that one of the heaviest bins that the bin lifter failed to pick up was actually stuffed full of some very, very large nappies, because when people get old and they're being cared for at home, and there's more and more people that are cared for at home now, I can assure you that they present much more in the way of that type of waste than a family with a couple of little children.
Thank you. Let's move to the vote, shall we? Claire. Thank you.
Members, that vote is now in progress. Thank you. Chair, that's 8 votes for, that's unanimous.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on to the next item. Now, following consultation just before the meeting, this item doesn't have to be a confidential item, although there is one confidential element to it, namely Appendix A, which is a viability assessment. But but I'm proposing that we discuss as much of it in open forum as we can, because it is something that's going to be of particular interest to people, I think, particularly those who live in Hadleigh. So it's item 15, paper BCA 21-7, the Hadleigh 871 Roadside Commercial Workspace Development. And I'll invite the Cabinet Member for Economic Growth to introduce this report. Councillor Holt.
Just wait for the officer just to... Sorry, just wait for our changeover. You okay, Fiona? Let's start there. Right, I'll crack on, Chair, if that's all right. Right, I'm very pleased to introduce this paper. I think it's something that shows the public how this council is approaching employment, and we are lucky that we have available to us a site that we are able to take the initiative and intervene in. This will be a direct and visible investment by Babergh to intervene in a market failure for small workspace unit delivery, where demand is still outstripping availability. And we've had mentor reports in 2019 which clearly show there's a lack of incubator space. We're actually conducting another mentor report now to have a review of that. And it's clear that within the district we do have this lack of units for sort of micro startups and sole traders. It's something that's particularly an issue really in Hadleigh and around Sudbury. As I say, it's district-wide, but we're having lots of houses built, and we do need employment, and we need the ability for these micro businesses to grow and sole traders to move into their own units, etc. So I think we're starting to take the initiative on this, and we're starting to try and readdress what is known as a shortage within the district. This opportunity will enable us to produce a retail store, and also it will make a difference in that Hadleigh in particular, as I say, has got a housing development right close to this, so there's an increased population. That retail unit will enable that community to have something very close to them, and it also supports our Invest in Hadleigh programme. The cost-benefit appraisals on the three main scenarios, including the estimated rate of return for the council, has been modelled with the report appendices and subject to reporting back to Cabinet in due course on final worked-up detailed proposals. The let retail sell B1 unit provides the largest projected rate of return of investment. However, letting all the units provides an ongoing rental stream for the council. Recently, the Cabinet indicated that should the investment be approved, there is a preference to, or at least in the short term, retain the units, all the units for let, and keep the flexibility for a later freehold disposal if that was chosen. With the understanding that this option will increase additional liabilities on the council, including potential voids and ongoing maintenance, administration, etc. There is an element of risk in full funding the surveys and investigations ahead of the transfer of the plot to Babergh, but undertaking this work now will mean the scheme can progress faster once this has taken place. Initially, this full ask would need to be revenue funding via transformation funds, with 80,000 able to be returned and capitalised once the scheme progresses to creation of an asset. We can also confirm that there is £100,000 of contingency modelled into these figures to offset the cost of surveys, investigation and design work towards a planning application submission. This is additional to the construction contingency allowance also costed in the total development cost. The opportunities to further the Council's climate emergency ambitions from a low carbon development incorporating site micro-regeneration and electric charging facilities should also be noted. I think, as I said, this I think shows the public that we are in a position to do this. We have the will to do it. I think it's something that we haven't done for a long time. I can't remember whether officers can, if we've actually done something similar to this for quite some time. I would urge my fellow members to approve this, and I would look for a seconder for the recommendations 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4 and 3.5, because as I say, I see this as Babergh leading the way in an area where it's important that we have employment land turned into actual real units, real job opportunities. There's a definite shortage. We're very lucky around Ipswich and the fringe to have some important building employment land being turned into sites going on. But for the rest of the district, I see this as a small but significant step in the right direction in intervening in what is clearly a market-led issue and failure to bring these units to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Boswell, were you seconding? Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I agree. It's an exciting scheme and a great opportunity that's been presented to us. It's not big, but it's still significant for Hadleigh, and it's great news for Hadleigh. The location is ideal, directly adjacent to the A1071. Questions. I've got one first, actually, a quick one from me. In terms of the funding for the initial feasibility work, do we have any business rates retention money left over that we could divert towards this?
Lee, do you want to pick that up?
So, sorry, yeah, we've looked at the options. There is sufficient in the Transformation Fund, which we put a bid in for, and obviously with the objective of 80% of that being reimbursed once the scheme progresses as a capital scheme. The business rate pots are quite depleted at the moment in terms of what has been allocated to specific projects. There may be an opportunity to move some of the funds round, which will require further reporting, but for the purposes of this report, we've confirmed with finance team that there is sufficient in the transformation carry forward to fund this initial 100,000.
Thanks, Lee. Thank you. Councillor McCraw.
Recommendation 3.2 suggests that we resolve our preference as to which option of the three scenarios should be progressed, and I think that's probably going to be the key to discuss this with. And I just wondered at what point we'd be doing so.
Yeah, obviously it would be great if we could do that without going into the detail of Appendix A. It might well be possible, to be honest, because I think Councillor Holt has already indicated what one way forward on that, I think, in terms of a preference. But if we can pick that up in a bit, does anyone have any other questions on the report? Councillor Arthey.
Yeah, I don't think it falls within the confidential section, because section 106 I think is a public document. So the question really is about how we come by this land. I think in the report it's called acquired or transferred in 2022. I'm guessing that there is no cost associated with this land. It forms part of a planning approval. And I'm guessing that if the developer has got anything to do with the wording or has had anything to do with the wording, I'm guessing there's likely to be some sort of a restriction on what we can or can't do with the land.
Yes, so it was transferred as part of a Section 106 proposal, and yes, it's restricted to employment use.
Okay, just to follow on from that then, there is no restriction in any way on us developing the site and selling on?
No, the restriction is about not building residential on the site.
Councillor Davis.
I might know as well. Would we be eligible for LEP funding and LEP support?
The LEP kind of channel national funding out rather than have their own funding. So we always keep an eye on that, as we did with the Build Britain building fund that we got for the solar carports. At the moment, I don't think they have any funding to put in this. We did ask them some time ago in terms of feasibility, but they're not really putting money into stuff like this at the moment. And like I say, most of the funding they have is channeled through larger government funds. So we keep an eye out for it, but I'm not sure it's going to quite fit with the timescale that we want to move this forward.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay,
If only
a quick
we knew
question, or do you want to move into debate yet, Councillor?
Everyone.
Sorry?
I was going to say, if only we knew a commercial investment property company that might like to invest in it, but...
Okay. I think we're done with questions, or is that a question, or move into debate? Question. Okay, Councillor McCraw.
I just wanted to confirm that the figures provided, which I'm not going to go into, include the cost of this viability study.
Yes, so the figures that we're not going to go into because on the confidential section do include that. It's probably worth mentioning, because I can mention this in the public section, that of the three scenarios, I think Councillor Holt pointed out the scenario 3 is not something that would attract a commercial developer because it shows a low rate of profit. That means if you build the scheme and sell it quickly, it doesn't make you a lot of money. However, as he's also pointed out, holding the scheme gives a fairly robust income over a long-term period, and a lot of commercial developers don't look to do that. They look to sell it on. So we have looked at those three scenarios both from a sort of commercial developer point of view, but the council is in a slightly unique position in that it can hold the asset if it wishes.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. So if we want to debate the various scenarios, Appendix A has got in an outline of the scheme. It's also got the pros and cons of the scenarios, and it's got a breakdown of the initial funding, which we've already talked a bit about. What we probably can't debate in open session, well, I know we can't debate in open session, the actual numbers in the table in the viability appraisal, but in terms of the pros and cons of the scenarios and assessing which of those we want to give priority to, does anyone have any comments they wish to make on the three scenarios? Councillor Hartley.
Is Michael, Councillor Holt, going to give us his preference?
Councillor Holt.
My preference would be to retain and have an investment come in. I would like to retain control over the units. So I would prefer to see possibly option 3.
And that's my preference too.
Being able to support this without going into part 2. So I would support that. It seems to me that if we opt for scenario 3 now, we can at any time in the future change to option 1 or 2. But if we opt for option 1 or 2 now, we can't revert to option 3 in the future.
That is true. It does leave all of our future options open.
I think it
leaves the future options open. Yeah.
I think we're in this for the longer game, and to retain control over that site in the short term, I think is important to us. We have total control, and if we do need to sell on those units at any point of the whole site, then we can do that. It's potentially the riskier, but as I say, we're here I believe, to do this type of work. We're here to deliver these type of units. We need to take the initiative on this sort of thing, and I think this gives a great opportunity for us to do that and to show what we are able to do if we get the right land. I know it's sort of fallen in our lap to a certain extent, but there's no reason we can't use this sort of model and go forward and do other sites should they come available, even in a larger scale. Unlike a commercial developer, we're not in it for the profit. We're in it to deliver workspace, opportunities for people, jobs, and I think this is a great scheme.
Yeah, it has fallen into our lap, and we should use that to our advantage. And I agree. It allows us to have that longer term support for businesses, but also speaking with my finance portfolio hat on, the idea of a net annual income, irrespective of the precise number, over a long period is something that we cannot really turn down as a district. We do need to maximise our income from alternative streams. We've had this debate many times around CIFCO and the need for that now, because it provides us with that income to replace lost government funding. Business rates, council tax, together are less than 50% of our income, and we have to have these alternative income streams, and this is part of that. And I think to retain and to have that annual income over the long term is the way forward. Councillor McCraw.
And the other thing about, apart from retaining flexibility, it seems to me that the one-off profits are not that significant in comparison to the annual rental surpluses. The figures in any breakdown would show that the rental surplus is far more valuable than a one-off profit here.
Absolutely agree. Councillor Busby.
What happened to scenario 4, which is to sell the retail unit and let the B1 units, which I would have thought was the one that was preferable? No, that's...
He's looking at the opposite of scenario 1.
You haven't got scenario 4. You've got...
I don't think that was one we ever considered.
It seems to me the logical one to do, which is you sell the retail unit, which is probably where the greatest demand is, and then you let the B1 units that you want to keep control over.
We did look at that very early, before we did any detailed modelling, and that retailers you've got two scenarios. They'd buy a site and put their own building up, or they'll lease it. It's unlikely they would take something that we would lease, that we would build and lease to them. The kind of retailers we're looking at, which is a food store retailer. I mean, it's something we can test as we go along, but the reality is that wasn't deemed, from our early discussions with local agents, that wasn't deemed to be something that was attractive to the market, so we didn't pursue it as one of the models.
Okay, I thought we had somebody potentially in mind for the retailer.
From a leasehold point of view,
right.
But not from a we build it and sell it freehold once built. That's why option 2 looks at selling the site rather than the completed building.
I think it's fair to say most retailers do go down the route of leasing.
Yes.
They certainly don't purchase land and own it. They tend to just lease a site.
In my experience in a lifetime in retail, that you always are looking not to have property and money tied up in property. You look for lease-back arrangements. You can sell off the properties very frequently. You build the big shed, and then you lease it, sell it off, and lease it back on a long-term period, because you retain flexibility that way. And the other danger is, if we did find somebody who purchased a property, if we could, is that they could literally go belly up, and that property could be left abandoned. So, yeah, I don't think option 4 is an option.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have anything they wish to say before we move to the vote? Looking at the recommendations then, we've got We've considered the business case and the options appraisal. It seems that we are satisfied to proceed. And so moving on to 3.2, our preference therefore is scenario 3. And then 3.3 to 3.5 as stated. Okay? And we'll vote on that basis then. Okay, thanks, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the vote is ready. Waiting for one vote, Chair. Councillor Malvisi, are you able to vote? That's great, thank you. That's 8 votes for, Chair.
Great, thank you very much. Right, we have one final item which we will have to go into confidential session for because it's to approve the confidential minutes from last time. So before we do that, we have to go through the resolution to exclude the public. So to consider whether, pursuant to Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public should be excluded from the meeting for the business specified below on the grounds that if the public were present during this item, it is likely that there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as indicated against each item. The author of the report proposed to be considered in Part 2 of the agenda is satisfied that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Arthey, seconder. Councillor Malvisi. We'll just have a quick vote on that then.
Councillor Malvisi, I'm still... Yeah, I'm still the last one. Okay, thanks. Shall I take your vote verbally or has it gone through now? 7 votes for, Chair, 1 abstention. Thank you.
Thank you.